We're going to talk about integration, an integrated mindset. And Heidi and I have a podcast that's labeled Integrated Mindset. And we have written over the course of however many last 3 years, we have written a program called Integrated Performance. We use it to help people to become leaders of their own lives, to impact the environment that which they either influence or live in, right? And so the program is so immersive of the content that we have created and our approach and the pillars that we use, from nutrition and sleep hygiene to mindset and mindfulness to breath and movement to self-discovery and all the different components of it. That's we created a sales page and we did all these things to like, oh, it's the 6 C's of human performance and it's the 4 pillars of this and all these things. It's like still people are like, yeah, but what is it? So we recently recorded a podcast, and actually, can you grab my pins out of the front of my pouch of my backpack? Out of my backpack, sis. We recently recorded a podcast, and what we flushed out is a more authentic conversation of like what this integration really is, and then what's the potential outcome of it as leaders of our own lives. Okay, so I have a handful of things written out here. We'll have a bit of a discussion. It'll be a little bit of lecture. I'll kind of post these up. I think we lost Valerie. Here against the wall as like a reference point, and we'll just kind of keep going. So thank you, Sissy.
I didn't know it was bad, so I just grabbed it.
Well, you just grabbed all of them. Yeah, that's great. And even a zip drive. So the first question is, do you want something to be different in your life? Yes or no? Right?
Yes.
Everybody, right? So here's the first why I start with this question is a couple things. Number one is to recognize we want something to be different within our own lives, within our own domain, or in the environment we live in. And to this level of acceptance, integration is this acceptance of knowing that as a human being, part of the way that we're wired is for growth and evolution. So the desire for something to be different is this part of what we call the evolutionary pulse. And so we'll talk about basic human needs and how this actually is just a part of why we are currently sitting here as human beings and why we're alive as a species, is because we're wired this way. We're wired to want something to be different. So sometimes people judge that. And our goal is to normalize the human experience, and so we can understand it, so we stop potentially getting in our own way and being our own obstacle. Does that make sense? So the question is, if you want something to be different, then okay, we are huge on getting to the root cause of things, not trying to deal with the obstacles and trying to get all the puzzle pieces to fit in our lives so we can feel okay for a moment, but to say, what is the actual cause or the root cause of what we're currently experiencing? So the question becomes, what's creating your current results? Based upon maybe something you've heard out there in the self-development, personal development world, what do we think is a root cause of our current circumstance and or results? Any ideas?
I think there's too much input.
A lot of it.
Too much input. Like I listen to a lot of self-help. A lot of those. Just I like to hear everyone's opinion on things, and I think it's all
Gets diluted.
yeah.
I talk to people about like being very selective when it comes to what you listen to and the mentors you take on, because messages can become so diluted because people are coming from all kinds of different potential angles, number one, but their motivations too. Like, what are they selling from? Fear potentially, or are they selling for what are they really trying to sell and why, right? So very interesting you bring that up. I love that. What else?
I would say the actions we take.
The actions to taking. And so what is it you think drives those actions?
Well, let's see, I do a little bit of like coaching. And so
Yeah, beautiful.
People that what drives your actions are your thoughts,
Okay.
your feelings.
Your thoughts and feelings. Yeah, good. That's where I wanted to get to. And so the funny thing about this is Joel, that like this input component is what we're going to dive into here in just a moment. That's what drives what's going on in our head, right? Which then drives our actions, which then drives our results, right? So that is the root cause. Yes, good. Okay. I have been on this path for, well, I mean, in the performance world my whole life, but on this idea of really trying to improve myself for the last decade or so. And I started right there with that very thing of thoughts, thought work, somebody would call it in personal development or coaching world, life coaching. People would say, oh, there's even something called the CTFAR. There's your circumstance, there's your thoughts about a circumstance, and the thoughts create feelings, and the feelings create actions, and actions create results, right? So then you can reverse engineer that model. Okay, well, what's the result I want? Okay, what's the action I need to take to get that result? How do I need to feel to act that way? How do I need to think to feel that way? Oh, I mean, okay, that can work, and it's a great thing to get started. But for me personally, that's exhausting. It's rather exhausting. So in the work that we've done, we have flushed out. I've studied high performance in all kinds of different angles and personal development, everything else. We have flushed out this cycle that has to happen for us to really gain traction in our lives, to get the results we want to have. First of all, we have to be able to let go of all the things that are happening. Letting go means our preferences, our biases, the thoughts, the feelings. There has to be this ability to no longer attach and identify to the things that are keeping us in the current circumstance and our situation we are in. I could talk to you. I do whole workshops on letting go. So we're not going to go into that. Overly, the understanding that first we have to create space. We have to let go of one paradigm so we can create a different paradigm, right? So if we try to hold on to our old life, the new life's never going to come into fruition. So this is a moment by moment cycle that's happening. When we let go, then we have to learn how to source our sense of feeling okay, of being good enough, of feeling safe, right? So as human beings, the reason why we're here is our brain is wired to create psychological safety, and it's going to do whatever it has to do for it to feel psychologically safe, which when we feel psychologically safe, that's because our basic human needs have been met. In that moment, when I feel safe, my needs are met. So we learn how to meet those needs. We then, from that place, can create clarity of the experience we want to have and the impact we want to make. And all these, again, are based in basic human needs. Then we can take authentic action from this place of abundance rather than from lack. And then we have to just let things happen. So I'm presenting this model to you as kind of a conversation of where we're going to go. We're going to come back to it in the end. All right. You don't have to understand all the components of it because the whole entire coaching program is 12-week program. And then beyond that is built with that in mind. So we just keep going. So where do thoughts come from? If we're saying that our thoughts and our feelings create our actions and our actions create our results, where do thoughts come from? Okay, so our past conditioning. Okay, so our past conditioning. When I say conditioning, I'm saying that everything that we're ever exposed to gets imprinted into our nervous system, right? And there's a record. Neurological pathways, nervous system is programmed to think and feel in a certain way. That's our past condition. So everything we've ever been exposed to, right? Everything we've ever watched. I have got to a place where I'm so hyper aware of the things I take in. And we watched a movie yesterday, and I was like, I felt uneasy all night into the morning, even because this movie, I was like, it's kind of disturbing. It's Castaway by Tom Hanks. Like the whole idea of like, he leaves his family, and then they think he's dead, and then my wife remarries, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this must be horrible, right? And it like impacted me, like psychologically, it impacted me. So, past conditioning. What else? Where else does our thoughts come from? Our brain, yeah. So we have different brains, right? We have 3 different brains. So our thoughts come from our 3 different brains. And what's our brain wired to do? It's wired to think, which helps us stay alive. Okay, helps us conserve energy. So it's wired for what we call, we just make it simple, it's wired for survival. And so what's it going to do to be wired for survival? It's going to try to conserve energy. It's going to try to conserve energy, because if I have excess energy, that means that I feel safe to be able to fight, to flee, to rest, recoup, to engage, to disengage. Like that brain that is constantly working in a way that is trying to keep us alive. So some of the thoughts that we have, and they say we have 60 to 7,000 thoughts a day. Now, I think there's other studies that say it's between 10 to 70,000 thoughts a day, but the average person is 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. Some of these thoughts are just, again, past conditioning. Some of it's from survival. Some of it's in the moment, like legitimately your brain trying to conserve energy and create patterns to conserve energy, right? So the problem is that we get all wrapped up in what we're thinking because it's just the brain doing what it's meant to do. It's like there's a level of like, hey, acceptance, like thank you for keeping me alive, thank you for keeping all of us alive, that's why we're here. So we are constantly seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. But there's two sides to every coin. Like that part of our brain that is seeking pleasure and avoiding pain can also lead us to a place of not having the experience that we want to have when we don't fully understand the human experience. The other thing that it's constantly doing is it's creating predictive algorithms saying like, oh, this happened yesterday, so expect for this to happen tomorrow. Like it's constantly wanting to create these predictive algorithms saying like, because it happened, it's going to happen again. Because that happened, somebody rejected me, they're going to reject you again tomorrow. Somebody, whatever. I mean, you can talk about money, finances, you could talk about religion and politics, or just even your own personal experience of what it's like to be you in the world. Here's the other thing. I've heard people say that it's wired to forget, which I'm going to put that up here because it's an easier way for us to relate to it. It's not necessarily true. What is true, though, that the brain remembers fear-based memories easier. So is it wired to forget the things that are good in your life, the things to be grateful for? Those aren't necessarily true. But what is true is that if it's relevant to you because it helps you stay alive, that memory based in fear is going to be right at the front of the filing cabinet. Like, don't do that again. Don't say that again. That was awkward. You felt socially rejected because of that. So it's easier to like open up the filing cabinet of your brain and be like, whoop, yep, that's why I'm not safe, or why I don't have what I want, or whatever it is. So it's a combination of past conditioning. Now let's go back to past conditioning for a minute. That's our social upbringing. That's our parents. That's all the different components of our perception and our bias, as well as the experiences that had happened over time, that every single time one of our basic human needs is not met, it creates a limiting belief about ourselves to try to conserve energy and keep us alive and keep us from being socially rejected again or otherwise, right? So this is also limiting beliefs. Now, here's my next question for you. How many of these have actually anything to do with this present moment? With right now? How many of these limiting beliefs and past conditionings and your survival, trying to conserve energy and these predictive algorithms and the idea that your brain's wired to forget, like how many of these actually have anything to do with the present moment? Nothing. My 8-year-old knows that.
I was gonna say no way around.
Yeah. It actually has nothing to do with right now. Like, are you safe right now? Right? It's anything about the past have anything to do with right now. Like, I know it happened and it's information, but something that happened when you're 8 or when you're 15 or when you were 25, like that was for that version of you, has nothing to do with this present moment. And so we start to recognize like, oh, thoughts are basically programs or patterns from the past. They're programs or patterns from the past. And here's something else I want you to keep in mind as we go through this. Thoughts and feelings are just stress trying to leave your body. That's all it is. Thoughts and feelings are just stress trying to leave your body. So why do we end up battling with them and even creating some unnecessary suffering? It's because we resist what the thoughts and the feelings. Are you coming in here? Don't think so. Okay. So basic human needs, we have it broken down into 4 different components. And I put it in a cycle like this because I love cycles. But first of all, without physical well-being, like connection, sense of self, and meaning really don't matter. Right? So you're going to fight like hell to make sure you have a shelter, right? You have food, you have water, you have these basic human needs first and foremost. And like when you're a baby, like this matters way beyond anything. Like if we don't touch an infant baby, it would die, right? Without the connection and that physical well-being. So these 2 things are very interlinked, right? Connection is because we're tribe-oriented human beings. We're better together, right? Because we're wired in a way that if somebody wandered off into the woods by themselves, they have less of a chance for survival because we're better as a tribe. So we're wired that way because it helps us stay alive. So we have to understand connection, and then eventually that we can talk about a sense of self, autonomy, choice, authenticity, integrity, and then meaning. Our lives have to have meaning, contribution, to be significant. Again, all of these are related to the idea of being tribal human beings, where we're better and wired for survival because we're better together.
Would you say that's order?
Yeah, not necessarily, but yeah, kind of. You know, like the reason why I put it like this is because I have noticed this show up. I work with a lot of youth to where like these 2 are very important when they're up to about that age, right? I noticed with my son, who's now going to be 10, he wants to know who he is, right? And eventually I've noticed with like the 14 to 18-year-olds that I work with, like they want to know their life has some sort of significance, right? And so like as we become more online as human beings and our lives evolve, and the more that our physical well-being has been met, right? And we know we have connection, we have significant other, we have a family, we have a job, a career, a role, these things, then it's like, okay, yeah, but, right? So midlife crisis happens a lot of times, 35 years old, and there's science behind that age too, because like we stop experiencing new things, like the brain legitimately has created all of its patterns where nothing now, unless we go seek a new experience, everything becomes the same. So what are we then going to go experience that is new and different, and unknown and unfamiliar to create new experiences? Like that becomes like, what's the real meaning of life, right? So yeah, and then it feeds back into it, because when you know the meaning of your life and how you contribute and how you're significant, right? How you celebrate life individually, then all of a sudden it makes it way easier to take care of yourself. Like the idea of taking care of yourself is like, yeah, of course. I know why I'm here.
That makes so much sense. It's almost like it should say meaning and like legacy, because
Sure.
like your meaning is to leave behind something. I mean, I feel like that's a big part of you want to leave behind.
You want to leave behind a legacy.
Take care of, or
Yeah.
you want to be remembered.
Yeah.
So,
Where if it's not so much you want to be remembered, you want to know that there was a ripple effect of your life.
Exactly.
Right? That you made a difference.
Yeah.
I love that. I might have to actually add legacy. That's yeah. What is it? We'll talk about it later, sweetheart. So the interesting piece is when one of these is not being met as we are developing, or even as we're human beings. Like yesterday, I don't feel like there's meaning to my life, because I go 3 or 4 days. We're up at the lake and we're hanging out and everything's all good and cush, and I kind of lose track of what I'm trying to bring to the world, the difference I'm trying to make. So it was a little harder to get out of bed this morning because I had disconnected from that sense of meaning. Like this is a constant vicious cycle that's always happening. We don't have to make it mean anything other than it's just part of being human. It's part of the human experience. And it's part of, again, it's part of the evolutionary pulse of why we're here. So here's my next question for you. That's where all these thoughts come from. When one of those needs is not being met, it creates a limiting belief about myself that says, when one of these needs is not being met, it says, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not adequate. What's the point of my life? Why am I here? That's the number one verbiage I hear from like 16 to 18-year-olds right now. Like, what's the point? Right? What's the point? That's what I hear from all the time. Okay, so here's my next question before I put this up. Are you your thoughts? If all your thoughts are based upon past conditioning and the idea that your brain's trying to keep you alive and is wired for survival, and is constantly trying to take the past and predict the future, are you your thoughts?
I mean,
Haley, honey, please stop. I know you know the answers. I know you've heard me. I know you've heard me coach 100 times.
I would say in some ways, yes. I mean, that's what leads to everything you're doing. But then in other ways, not at all.
Not at all. Yeah. So how do you differentiate between the two, right? Like this is a very deep, like spiritual question, but at the same time, what I want to challenge here in this conversation is that if they're all based upon yesterday and they don't really actually have, I can then decide to either engage with them or to not engage with them. And so here's the thing, the thoughts have value. I'm not saying they don't have value. They have incredible value because the thoughts, I can generate a feeling based upon a thought. I can generate an experience when I have a concept and or idea. But we're talking about the root cause of why we want something to be different. And if we are constantly ruminating in the reasons why it's not the way I want it to be, or that based upon all of these past conditionings and everything else is, if I'm involved in all these thoughts, then I'm probably going to continue to create more of the same experience in the future if I'm overly involved with my thoughts. Like this goes back to when I was 18 years old. I got a piece of advice from a parent that I really, really trusted, right? Of a friend of mine. He said, listen to the voice in your head. So I went 20 plus years listening to everything I thought. And it led me to a very dark place, right? And now I only pay attention to the thoughts that are pure and whole and complete when I have completely silenced everything else out, right? There's a difference between thoughts and intuition, right? Thoughts are repetitive, not structured, right? Based on survival, based upon your basic human needs and just trying to keep you safe and past conditioning, all these things. And they are endless, right? So the reality is that they're just part of the human experience. They're part of our past conditioning. They live in patterns in our body. 95% of them can just be accepted and let go of because they're part of that human experience. Like I don't have to get involved with them. And so we just are building this case to like be able to understand the human experience. And this is just part of the evolutionary pulse. So they're just patterns because, again, to get the results I want, if my thoughts are creating my actions and I'm believing that my thoughts are me, like I find that to be a problem, right? And there's a way to be able to actually wire our brain to think the way we want it to think, to actually train our mind to create the outcomes we want it to create, right? So let's go a little bit deeper. Where are these patterns? So if everything is patterned and conditioned into our body, where do they live? Where do these patterns that we're talking about, where do they live? Where do patterns live? Where does this past conditioning live? Where do all these thoughts live? They live somewhere. They're housed in our brain, in our body. Yeah. Well, here's the interesting conversation. Our brain, 80% of the fibers from your gut and your heart are dedicated to communicating to your brain. 20% of the fibers going from your brain back down into your body are communicated for motor movement. So the brain is being fed information, and then it's being telling the body what to do, how to feel, right? Through chemicals and hormones getting released and all these different things, right? So the patterns live in our body. I'm gonna give you an example. Here's our brain. This is my artwork. I'm not an artist. Okay, so there's 3 different types of brains. Come back here, our 3 brains. Our first is completely based in survival, our reptilian brain, basically our brain stem, and it's based in just the unconscious part of our body that, motor movements, right? The second part of your brain is a limbic brain. It's very emotional, very tribe-oriented part of your brain, right? And our brain has over time has evolved this way. And then the cortex, and then obviously the prefrontal cortex, the prefrontal PFC is our like control tower. So here's the interesting thing that happens. I say stub your toe. I like to actually use because I have kids, the example of stepping on a Lego. Okay, so you're walking up the stairs, and it happened actually just a couple days ago. Boom, Lego. Oh, right. So it's a sensation that happens in my body, That sensation travels up through my brainstem. This happens very quickly, right? That then is signaling, oh, I stepped on something, right? Then I realize it's a Lego. So from there, it goes up into my limbic system, and I get into the social narratives of, well, why do the kids leave their Legos on the stairs? Why, Heidi, when was the last time we vacuumed? Right? I mean, all of these models and narratives, and then I'm still ow, ow, ow up the stairs, creating actually what was just a sensation in my body into all kinds of story and suffering. Right? They shouldn't leave that there. Oh, I'm in a frenzy now. Right? Well, in all reality, that's an untrained mind. In all reality, it's just a sensation that travels up into my brainstem. It passes through my limbic system. I might go, oh, what? And then a prefrontal cortex, the control tower that's online that allows for our whole brain to communicate, it just goes, and it just dissolves. I pick up a Lego, I don't make it mean anything. Kids, please don't leave your Legos on the stairs. And that's the end of it. Right? It's because based upon our past conditioning, based upon then our past conditioning creates expectations. We then place meaning on what we're being fed up through our brainstem into our limbic system. So every sensation, vibration, frequency, what we call feelings and emotions, even feelings and emotions are just what you labeled, what you're experiencing in your inner domain. It's just what you call fear, doubt, anxiety, excitement, but it's a label. It's just a label. Like, we had this conversation just earlier as a family. Haley was talking about something. I said, well, it depends on how you define it. Yeah, she was, oh yeah, well, school starting. We're going to a new school. And so she goes, well, I'm scared. I said, are you scared or are you nervous? She goes, oh, I'm nervous. Well, do nerves mean that you're anxious or excited? She goes, well, I guess it can be excited. Like, oh, so we just took scared and transmuted it into excitement because we just labeled it different. That's all it is. It was the label we placed on it that helped us stay alive. Well, we can teach them how to feel what they're feeling and place their own labeling on it that allows for them to have the experience they want to have. So now she's excited. So it comes up through the brainstem, the sensations into your limbic system. So the patterns live in a combination between the sensations that are being driven up through your body and then the chemical or hormonal release that gets dumped back down and that goes, oh yeah, and then you think and you feel and you feel and you think and you think and you feel, and it's this vicious cycle of thinking and feeling, thinking and feeling, thinking and feeling. Which in our program, we only give about 5% of the attention to it because we want to create an environment and condition our bodies to the experience we want to have. This is very surface level work. And it's very necessary. It's very important. Most, life coaches, thought coaches, they say, okay, well, tell me what you're thinking, tell me what you're feeling. It's important because it helps somebody open the door to realize, oh, if I thought differently, I could feel differently. If I felt differently, I'd act differently. Therefore, I'd get different results. Yes. It's all right. But it can only take you so far because how many of the 60 to 70,000 thoughts am I going to do that with? Right? How many times a day are you going to rework something? Right? I mean, 2 or 3, 10 or 20. Here's the reality of it. There can be thousands of thoughts behind one feeling or emotion. And that feeling or emotion there can be 8 or 10 different feelings and emotions that we have labeled that are behind one foundational sensation that's happening inside of our body. Right? It just depends on the information that we're getting from our environment. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I introduced this because it's incredibly impactful. This idea that you are the placebo. What creates placebo, meaning the ability for us to actually have an experience that is based upon our conditioned expectations and meaning. They give people a pill that's going to cure a disease, and they give other people a salt pill. They tell them this is going to cure your disease. Well, the numbers of people who actually get cured are quite similar between the people who actually get the medicine and the people who are being delivered a salt pill. Right? So what's working? Is it the medicine Or is it the expectation that this is going to heal me? Right? Our minds are so freaking powerful, but we have to understand them. So our placebo, as being the placebo for our own lives, is our conditioning, our expectations, and our meaning. So we learn how to actually flip the model and be able to create our own placebo for our lives by being greater than our body, greater than our environment, and greater than time. Now, what that means is when I get fired up, when there's a limbic flare up of sorts, I don't go caught up into the story and the narratives and all these different things. I actually drop into the sensations of our body. I actually pay attention to and let go of. You can start with letting go of thoughts, and then about 2 days later, you're going to be exhausted. Or you can go and you can actually go inside your body and liberate energy and sensations that allow for you to then become the placebo of your own life. So you didn't know why you were here. Now you're like, why am I here? All right. So the reality is this. We're going back to the beginning, tying it all back in, then we'll have a discussion. Freedom is not in the characters. The characters are the thoughts and the feelings. The experience of life that you do want to have, you want something to be different, it's not going to be, because there's a level of healing and growth that needs to happen for us to have the experience of life we do want to have. And we have to let go of the old story to step into a new story. We have to put the two side by side to have that paradigm shift. So if patterns live in the body, in our nervous system, that drives our mental models in our brain, and then our brain says, oh, here's the chemicals and the hormones that's going to match that belief, that experience. So we keep having the same experience over and over because it wants to create patterns to conserve energy. So legitimately, it's an energy conserving machine. So it wants to keep the same patterns. It doesn't want to change patterns over and over and over. So if that's the case, then our freedom is in the sensations of what I'm feeling inside my body, without story, without judgment. See, because when you get caught up in the thoughts and the feelings and the feelings and the thoughts in the story that are all basically just part of being human, right? You're resisting the fact that you're just basic human. And then you end up creating unnecessary suffering. You end up ruminating about things that don't even matter. I mean, 95% of the things that we worry about never even come to fruition. Right? The brain would rather be wrong 99 times than wrong once. Right? It'd rather be wrong over and over and over and over and say, well, yeah, I was wrong, but I'm still here. Rather than being, I was wrong, and now I'm not here anymore. Right? So you just learn how to be able to allow for all this extra verbiage and narrative and surface chop to be there without really getting involved with it. Because when we're involved, and again, now, this is not judgment, this is acceptance. I don't know if you can still see these. So this is just, again, coming back to these basic human needs, coming back to this evolutionary pulse. Right? We're wired to operate from lack. As human beings, we're wired to operate from lack. Why? Because that's what creates desire. We want something to be different. So if we can create something to be different, then we'll have the life we want. Well, that's what helps us to evolve as human beings. Again, without us being wired for survival, without us being wired to operate from a place of lack and have desire, we would not be here as a human race. Some other species would have overcome us. So here's the thing, though. We're in an era where you would say most of us, right? We can go to the grocery store, we can get our food. We don't have to go forage for food. We don't have to wonder if our hunters are going to bring back food or not, right? We don't have to build fires. We don't have to go, so there are people in the world, but we live in a place where we don't have to walk a mile each direction to get water. That's right. It's our basic human needs are met for the most part. Yeah, and connection is still important, a sense of self and meaning. These things but we are operating from a soft hardware perspective as human beings that's not based in 2022, right? Whereas before, our extra resources were to actually keep us alive and we're used to do so. But now, legitimately, our extra resources are like, well, I don't want to be socially rejected. Right? You look about all the information coming in. Our brains are not wired to take in all this information. Even just that you look outside, the cars passing and there being bulletin boards and then we social media, we turn on TV, we watch the news, we read the paper, like it's so much more information than our brains are wired to be able to process. And then we're exposed to our kids are going to school with 1,800 kids in a high school. And there's incredible amounts of social terrains they have to cross and all these decisions they have to make that we're not wired to make. And they're not really based in survival. They're based in the idea that we're tribal creatures that don't want to get socially rejected. So then we create limiting beliefs because we feel like we're not safe to be who we are. We don't know who we are. We then act in a way that's from a place of lack.
And just a point to tie it back, social rejection feels the same as
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So if I feel like my wife's going to reject me or anybody else, my body does not know the difference, right? It's the same as a gun being pointed to my head. The physiological response, the chemicals and the hormones get dumped in my body feels exactly the same, whether I'm being socially rejected or whether I'm physically in danger, right? So because we live in 2022, because we know where most of our food and water comes from, because at the end of the day, we then now can use these extra resources to create a whole new experience of life. But we have to learn how to just accept and acknowledge part of our human experience and the evolutionary pulse so we then can create the experience that we desire. We have to go from operating from lack to operating from abundance. This is a limited mind. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. Like in a moment when a brain surgeon is tying a surgical knot, I want them to be fully focused on that one present moment, to be outwardly focused and to become merged with that knot, right? Because that's a very important task in that moment, especially if it's my brain. Right? But the problem is that we become so outwardly focused and operating from lack that our sense of happiness is in some sort of container outside of ourselves. It's in a role, it's in a relationship, it's in an amount of money, it's in a destination, it's in a vacation, it's in some sort of like finish line, right? Which we never reach. There's no amount of accomplishment you're ever going to have that's ever going to make you feel the way you want to feel, ever. I know this because I've experienced it. I chased a childhood dream my whole entire life. I achieved it. It lasted for seconds. My whole life was built for this moment. I achieved it. And not 30 seconds later, my mind goes, now you got to do it again. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, and that was when I recognized, that's when I began to transition to a different life, because I realized it doesn't matter how successful I am in any realm. It's always going to want more. So operating from lack looks like this. You're waiting to feel how you think you will feel when the goal challenge is accomplished. The goal is money, status, winning a game, whatever it is, relationship. You're waiting to feel that way. I'll feel that way when. I'll feel that way when, which is then operating and creating unnecessary obstacle, right? We're creating unnecessary obstacle. We're creating more conditioning based upon operating from lack. We're feeding into the narrative of survival. Abundance is knowing how you want to feel, deciding how you want to feel, as if the completion of the goal or challenge and allowing yourself to feel that way now. So these are actually circuitries that happen in our brain. It's called now and later circuits. We learn how to meet our own needs, this high performance model. We let go. We learn how to meet our own needs now. And then we know we have a clarity of the experience and the impact we want to make. We know how we're going to continue to feel this way of safety and security and psychological safety. That's how I'm going to feel this way next week, next year, next whatever it is, decade from now. And when I can determine this is how I feel safe now, this is how I feel safe later, but then allow for myself to feel what I think is going to help me feel safe later. Now, that's when true growth, true healing, and way less obstacle. When we master this, and I'm not saying I have, but I'm getting better at it every day. Like legitimately the Red Sea parts. Legitimately the phone rings. the people walk into our lives that support the experience we want to have, the impact we want to make. Because we're no longer creating unnecessary obstacle. We're no longer trying to get all the puzzle pieces of our life to fit in a certain way so we can have one moment where we feel, okay, I'm a national champion. Thank God all of this time and energy made sense. That was mine. I was a college football coach. So why is this important? Last part of the conversation, then I want questions. Why is this important? Well, why is self-leadership important? Because this is what we're talking about. Becoming the leader of our own lives. Understanding the human experience to be able to create the experience we do want to have. As a leader, to create the safest environment of growth possible for loved ones or for team members. I misspelled here. They need to know you do not source your sense of safety from them. Okay, so for my kids and for my wife to feel completely safe and secure, they need to know they can tell me anything. And I'm not going to source my sense of safety and security from the relationship I have with my wife. I meet my own needs. She meets her own needs. We come together whole, complete individuals. She tells me something that's going wrong with her day. I'm not going to make it mean something about me. So they can tell you anything, and you will not make it mean anything. The loved one or team member knows you can generate your own sense of safety, security, worthiness, being adequate, and being lovable unconditionally. They know you are a rock of psychological safety. They know, therefore, that they can lean in and tell you anything without you projecting your shadow, your limiting belief about the world and yourself back on them. And there's this massive ripple effect that happens when we do this work to understand how to make ourselves feel the way we want to feel, to then step out and authentically act in that way, to create the results we want and to let it happen, is that it gives others the faith and the optimism that they can create their own safe harbor as well. So what does that mean? That means that we are relieving unnecessary suffering. That means that the obstacles that don't need to be there, that are created by the 95% of the thoughts that you don't need to get involved in, they don't happen. You don't even give them attention or energy, because our egos, and we're in an era where we no longer have to create our egos based out of fear. If we don't feel psychologically safe, we create an ego that's based out of fear. And that ego based out of fear strives to overcome that fear, strives to try to feel good enough, strives to try to feel worthy, strives to try to feel safe and secure, tries to meet basic human needs, but doesn't understand the human experience, therefore created an unnecessary obstacle. So our mission is to create environments of growth within ourselves so others can, and we can create unlimited possibilities of growth and healing in our world. Right? So we use the 4 pillars of nutrition, sleep hygiene, breath, movement, mindfulness, and mindset, and personal discovery to understand the human experience and then be able to create the experiences we do want to have. And it's this constant cycle that's always happening. We're constantly learning to let go more and more, learn how to meet our own needs or acknowledge that they're part of the human experience, which will allow for us to create the internal environment that can create clarity of experience we do want to have, the impact that's going to make. We then step out and authentically act. This is where a lot of people miss it in the yogi world. They go inward, they learn to meet their own needs, they feel safe and secure, but like, where's your next meal come from? Right? I know a lot of yogis who don't have a lot. They put on this facade like they're super peaceful, but they're waking up in lack every day. Why? Because they're not acting. You have to get out and produce. It's part of being human. So when we come to that place of clarity and the impact we're going to make, we step out and authentically act. And then here's the most powerful part. Like, there's a difference between letting go and surrender. A lot of people put those in the same category. They're different. Surrender means like, I'm going to be in this experience, the now and later, as if it's already happened, which allows for it to happen faster and in ways that you never could have imagined. I mean, better than you ever could have imagined. That's a lot of information, isn't it?
So good. There needs to be a part 2.
Part 2 is taking the course for 12 weeks.
I know, I'm thinking to myself, 12 weeks gonna be enough.
No, it's not. It's not. And here's the thing. But in those 12 weeks, we will have planted enough seeds where you'll be able to continue the practice of being able to get yourself to a place where you start to go like, oh, look at that.
You'll put together a whole bunch of refresher courses.
Well, I'm going to have master courses, and you have access to the content lifetime. We will also, and the reason why I love that point, because we're not here to try to sell. Heidi calls it, the 8-minute abs. I'm not telling people that they can 20x the potential in 15 minutes a day. I see people doing that. Even one of my mentors just put something like that, and I was like, oh, come on, man, you know better. It's a lifetime of practice. Just because I know this content doesn't mean that I practice it every single minute, right? So we have lifetime access to the content. We're going to have weekly Q&As where either it's like, okay, I went through it, or I'm going through it. I have a question. This popped up. What is that? Whatever it is, right? The other people who will get on those Q&As are anything from a nutritionist, a functional nutritionist, who's, I believe, one of the best in the world at what she does. She helps train special op candidates, to a neuropsychologist who has basically helped us to formulate and put all of this work together. We had this whole entire coaching program written, and then I had a neuropsychologist go through my program line by line to make sure it was in alignment with neuropsychology and neuroscience. And then I have a friend of mine who is legitimately an energy master, Chinese medicine, acupuncturist, Qigong master, been practicing his whole life. And so he just knows things about the breath and physiological responses and how to shift states that I never will ever spend that much time to understand. So I just bring him in to teach us, right? So this is what we're doing, to where we want to create an environment, Joel, that we plant the seeds and then you go at your pace, right? Knowing that once you're a part of our tribe, that there's going to forever be consistent interaction and support, right? And then